My name is Kareem Haddad, though most people in Washington used to call me Kenny. I was born in Dearborn, Michigan in 1976, the son of Lebanese immigrants who came chasing a better life. My father put in endless shifts at the Ford plant, hands stained with oil and metal dust, while my mother did everything she could to raise us with dignity. We were Muslim by culture, but I was never devout. As a boy, I recited prayers because my parents asked me to, not because I believed. By the time I was a teenager, I quietly stopped. What mattered to me was making money and carving out an identity in America. Religion felt like something that belonged to the old world, something that slowed me down. I wanted cars, status, and power. I got my start fixing engines in a small Detroit shop, then learned how to drive anything: limousines, armored vehicles, private sedans. That skill pulled me into a world I never expected. By my mid-20s, I was chauffeuring for influential people in Washington, D.C. Through connections, I ended up driving for Joe Biden during his time as vice president and later when he became president. People imagine that kind of job gives you power, but in reality you're invisible. You see and hear everything, yet you're expected to be silent. I became addicted to that strange mix of proximity to power and personal emptiness. I drank heavily, gambled, wasted money on fleeting relationships. Whenever people asked about my faith, I shrugged. I told them, I believe in something higher, but no church or mosque owns the truth. It was my cover for living without accountability. For years I kept chasing that empty dream, until one night when I was 47 years old. I was driving down a highway in Delaware, exhausted but pushing through. Ahead of me, a semi-truck loaded with massive industrial glass panels tipped over. In seconds, my car was swallowed in a storm of shattered glass. The crash sounded like a cathedral collapsing. The windshield burst, shards rained into me, and the steering wheel crushed my chest. I remember blood flooding my mouth, my body going cold. Sirens in the distance faded as my vision dimmed. Then there was silence. I flatlined. And that was the moment my life, my beliefs, and everything I thought I knew shattered like that glass. The moment my eyes closed in that wreck, I thought it would all go black and end. Instead, it was as if I had been dropped into a pit with no bottom. I wasn't floating. I was falling endlessly, through a suffocating dark so heavy it pressed against my skin. I could hear myself screaming, but my voice didn't echo. It was swallowed. At first, I told myself it was a dream, some brain trick while I was dying. But the deeper I sank, the more real it became. My senses were sharper than they had ever been in life. I could feel the air, hot, damp, like breathing through burning cloth. I could smell sulfur mixed with the stench of decay, and underneath it all, something metallic like blood left too long in the sun. Then came the sound. Chains. Not clattering on the floor, but hanging above, stretching across the sky like iron rivers. They groaned and snapped as if they were alive, as if they were holding something far heavier than I could imagine. Shapes began to emerge around me, shifting shadows with faint human outlines. They didn't walk, they writhed, twisted, and stumbled like broken marionettes. Some wailed, others muttered prayers. The strange thing was, I recognized the prayers. Catholic prayers, fragments of the Hail Mary and the Our Father, but warped. The voices recited them too fast, too slow, sometimes backwards. It was mocking, like the prayers had been turned inside out. As I tried to make sense of it, faces appeared. At first, strangers. Then faces I knew. My uncle who drank himself into an early grave. An old friend from high school who overdosed. Their eyes were empty, glowing faintly like coals, and yet they looked straight at me. They didn't plead for help, they accused me. Their mouths opened, and though the words weren't spoken, I heard them in my head. You are like us. Empty. Faithless. Chained. The ground beneath me shifted. It wasn't ground at all. It was layers of bodies, writhing, fused together, skin melted into skin, as if they had become the very floor of this place. When I stepped, they screamed. And every step I took, I sank deeper into them. The worst part wasn't the fire, there was some in the distance flaring up like storms. It wasn't the smell, though that alone was enough to break a man. It was the realization that this place knew me. My memories played on the walls of the darkness. I saw myself behind the wheel of a limousine, pretending to be invisible as I ferried men of power. I saw myself slipping cash into the hands of women I barely remembered the names of. I saw my own smirk as I shrugged off questions about God. It was as if hell had taken the fragments of my life and carved them into knives. And every second, those knives cut deeper into my soul. Then came the voices. Not from the shadows, not from the damned, but from somewhere deeper. They called my name. Slowly at first, then louder. Kareem. Kareem. My stomach twisted because the voices were not strangers. They were familiar, almost gentle. Yet the familiarity made it more terrifying. The heat grew unbearable, the air thick with ash. I tried to scream, to plead, to run. But the more I struggled, the heavier the chains around me became. They weren't visible on my arms or legs, but I could feel them. They clamped down on my chest, wrapped around my throat, squeezed until even thoughts felt bound. I knew then that this was no dream. This was no brain flicker or hallucination. I was in a place designed to strip me of every excuse, every mask, every lie. A place where religion, politics, wealth, or status meant nothing. Here, truth was fire, and fire burned everything false away. That was the first time in my life I admitted to myself, I am in hell. The voices that called my name grew clearer, cutting through the groaning chains and the endless screams. I turned toward the sound, though my body felt heavy as if invisible weights were strapped to me. At first I thought the heat and smoke were tricking me. But then, through the haze, I saw them. Two figures, standing in contrast to the writhing shadows. It took me moments to recognize them, because their presence here made no sense. Yet deep in my memory I had seen photographs, heard stories whispered in private moments when Joe Biden would let his guard down. Standing before me were Nylia Biden and her young daughter Naomi, his wife and daughter who died in a car crash decades ago. They didn't look like the other souls. They were sorrowful, radiant in a strange way, but not free. Their forms flickered between light and shadow, as if caught between realms. Nylia's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had fallen into this place, I felt a pang of something human, grief, recognition, even shame. She spoke my name. Kareem. The sound of it sent chills through me, not because it was harsh but because it was filled with authority. Naomi, the child, stood beside her, silent, yet her gaze pierced deeper than words. I stammered, "Why are you here? You don't belong here." Nylia shook her head. "You think this place is only for the wicked. You think death respects religion, titles, or power. But you are blind. The corruption of faith, the twisting of holy things, drags souls into chains heavier than any sin of flesh." Her words hit me harder than the crash had. Behind her I saw a vision, massive cathedrals, golden chalices, men in robes chanting. But the image warped, and the chalices spilled not wine but blood. The chanting twisted into screams. The cathedrals cracked open to reveal chains anchoring the building itself into the ground of hell. I cried out, "No, I don't belong here. I believed in something. I wasn't evil." Naomi's young voice finally spoke, soft but terrible. "To believe in nothing is worse than to believe in a lie." Before I could respond, the darkness surged around me. Figures I knew appeared one after another, as if summoned by the chains themselves. My uncle, glaring at me, holding a bottle that poured fire instead of liquor. A friend from my youth, his veins blackened from overdose. And then strangers, faces of women I had used, colleagues I had betrayed, people whose names I barely remembered but whose eyes now condemned me. They circled me, pointing, shouting accusations. You used us. You mocked faith. You lived only for yourself. You belong here. Demons slithered between them, creatures with twisted faces that shifted like masks, one moment looking like a politician I had once chauffeured, the next like a stranger. They gripped chains and lashed them around me, pulling me toward pits where fire bubbled like molten rivers. Every step toward that pit felt like my soul was being peeled apart. I screamed for mercy, but the word fell dead in the air. One of the demons leaned close, its face taking on my own reflection. You had no master, Kareem. You said no mosque, no church, no temple owned you. That is why we own you now. I fell to my knees. The ground was hot and alive, bodies writhing beneath my palms, shrieking as if my touch burned them. The weight of my life pressed down on me. The lies I told women, the money I wasted on gambling, the arrogance when people asked about God, every moment replayed in perfect clarity, like knives driven into my chest. I looked back at Nylia and Naomi, desperate, begging them to help. But Nylia only wept, shaking her head. You cannot be rescued by us. You must see the truth. The demons dragged me closer to the edge of the pit. I saw souls thrown in, their bodies bursting into flame only to reform and burn again. Their screams layered into one endless note of despair. I knew in that moment what eternity meant. Not years, not centuries, but a punishment with no end, no hope, no escape. And then came the worst revelation. As I hung over the pit, chains tearing at my flesh, I realized the pit was not just fire. It was filled with voices. Every voice of every time I had laughed at faith, dismissed prayer, ignored the quiet whispers in my conscience. My own words became my tormentors, echoing back endlessly, louder than the flames. I broke. I confessed out loud, screaming until my throat tore. I wasted my life. I mocked the one who gave it to me. I deserve this. The admission didn't free me, it chained me tighter. But it stripped me of denial. That was when I understood the meaning of despair. This was not simply punishment. It was revelation. Hell was the unveiling of who I truly was. All masks gone. All excuses burned away. And as I looked into that pit ready to be swallowed, I thought, all hope is gone. Just as the chains tightened and the pit below me opened wide, something impossible happened. Out of the suffocating dark came a glimmer, faint at first, like a star barely breaking through storm clouds. The demons hissed, jerking the chains tighter, but the light grew stronger, spreading until it cut through the blackness like a blade. The pit below shrank back. The screams around me softened. And for the first time since I had fallen into this place, I felt warmth that did not burn but healed. I lifted my head and there he was. Jesus. I don't have words big enough for what I saw. He was not the distant figure from paintings or the name I had dismissed in conversation. He was living light, standing in the center of darkness, and everything around him trembled. The demons recoiled like shadows fleeing the sunrise. The chains on my body glowed red, then shattered into dust. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw every sin of my life reflected. Nothing was hidden. Yet in the same eyes, I saw love deeper than anything I had ever known. It wasn't tolerance. It wasn't pity. It was a love that burned away lies, a love that demanded truth. I fell on my face, unable to stand. I expected him to condemn me, to cast me into the pit I deserved. But instead his voice came not loud, but carrying more power than thunder. You were empty, Kareem. You chased shadows. But even here I have come for you. The ground that writhed with the bodies of the damned stilled beneath me. The chains above fell silent. Even Nylia and Naomi bowed their heads as the light surrounded me. For the first time I felt hope, not the fragile hope of denial but a hope rooted in something eternal. The pit closed. The demons vanished. All that remained was him, his light filling every corner of the darkness. And in that moment I knew, Hell is real, but so is salvation. When my eyes opened, I was gasping. A blinding white light hung above me, but this time it was from hospital lamps, not from heaven. Doctors shouted, nurses scrambled, and someone said, "We got him back." But I wasn't the same man they pulled from that wreck. My body shook not from pain, but from the memory of fire, chains, and the gaze of Jesus. I lay there, torn between two worlds. One side of me whispered, it was hallucination. Trauma. Chemicals in the brain. The other side roared louder, no. It was more real than life itself. Days passed, but sleep brought no rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the pit screaming, saw Nylia's sorrow, and remembered Naomi's piercing words. To believe in nothing is worse than to believe in a lie. I realized that was me. I had spent my whole life shrugging off faith, mocking the search for truth, hiding behind shallow excuses. Now I couldn't. The experience left me raw. I couldn't escape it with alcohol, money, or women. Nothing dulled it. I walked the hospital halls at night, whispering to myself, why me? Why did he come for me? I didn't know how to live with what I had seen. I only knew this. I could never go back to who I was. When I was discharged from the hospital, people expected me to return to my old life. My phone buzzed with calls from colleagues, offers of work, and shallow invitations to parties. I ignored them all. The thought of slipping back into that emptiness terrified me more than the crash itself. I left Washington behind. I sold the car I once loved, gave away most of my belongings, and moved into a small apartment far from the noise of politics. For the first time I craved silence, not the suffocating silence of hell, but the kind where you can actually hear your own soul breathe. I began speaking to anyone who would listen. Not grand speeches, not polished sermons, but raw confessions. I died. I went to hell. I saw chains, fire, and faces I can never forget. And then Jesus broke through. Some people laughed. Some said trauma had scrambled my brain. But others wept. They told me they too had felt the emptiness of hollow religion, the ache of unanswered questions. I didn't convert to one label or cling to one tradition. I didn't suddenly become a saint. I was still flawed, still wrestling with doubts. But I knew two things for certain. Hell is not a metaphor and Jesus is not a story. He is real and he comes even for the lost. My new quest became simple. To live honestly, to warn others, and to never again waste the gift of breath. It has been years since that night in Delaware, but not a day passes that I don't feel its shadow and its light. The scars on my body remind me of broken glass and twisted steel, but the deeper scar is inside me. The memory of hell and the mercy that pulled me out. I no longer chase money or recognition. I no longer pretend that drifting without faith is freedom. I have learned that to live without truth is to already be in chains. Today I live quietly. I help in community projects, I sit with strangers who need to talk, and when people ask why I seem different, I tell them simply, because I have seen eternity and it is nothing to play with. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't wear a label. But I know what I saw. I know the fire was real. I know the chains were real. And I know Jesus came for me when all hope was gone. So I speak now to anyone who hears my story. Do not wait until your breath is gone to ask what is true. Do not waste your life on shadows. There is light. There is mercy. But you must seek it while you can. My name is Kareem Haddad. I was a driver, a drifter, a man who thought nothing owned him. But I died. I went to hell. And I came back forever changed.